Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Professor Mike Stewardson, CEO of the One Basin CRC, and I'm pleased to acknowledge that I'm joining this meeting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. The One Basin CRC's vision is that Australia's irrigation regions are the most productive, resilient, and sustainable in the world. And our purpose is to work together to grow value from water in a changing world. The CRC is funded under the Commonwealth Government's Cooperative Research Centre program with matching support provided by our 85 partners shown here with the collection of logos. So welcome to this panel discussion on addressing water quality threats in the Murray-Darling Basin. This discussion is part of a series of panel sessions that we're holding in the context of the Basin Plan, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan review, which is underway. We've now had, I think, 4 or 5 sessions, total views of around 1,000 people. So I'm really pleased with how that's going, and hopefully those who have listened to previous sessions have found them useful and interesting. So as I said, this time we're talking about water quality threats in the basin. And since 2012, the basin plans played a role in water quality management by setting water quality objectives and targets and requiring water managers to have regard to water quality in their activities. The discussion paper recently released as part of the Basin Plan review reported that although the Basin Plan has improved water quality, current arrangements do not adequately address the complexity of the drivers of water quality. It points to the challenge of fragmented responsibilities and a weak link between land and water management as barriers to effective water quality management in the basin. Water quality is one of the clearest tests of whether basin management is working in practice. Fish kills, algal blooms, blackwater events, and other water quality crises remind us that environmental flows alone are not enough to support healthy rivers. Today's discussion is about what water quality threats matter most, what we know and do not know, and what the next stage the Basin Plan could do to improve the way these issues are addressed. I'm pleased to invite anybody who is attending today to ask questions through our Q&A function. You can see the Q&A button at the top of the screen. Please post questions there. Not in the chat, we won't see those, but if you put them in the Q&A, we will, and I'll try and get to some of those questions during the session. Those that we don't, we will respond to after the session and send out to all the participants. Okay, so let's get started. We've got 3 panelists today, and I'd like to start the discussion by introducing Professor David Hamilton, who is Director of the Australian Rivers Institute at Griffith University. Good afternoon, David. And I've got a question for you, David. Why should water quality be front and centre in the Basin Plan review rather than treated as a separate issue?
Well, water quality is quite a complex topic, really, and by that, what I mean is it consists not just of the physical and chemical things that we measure, like nutrients and dissolved oxygen and temperature, but it extends right through to influencing all of the ecological functions in the river. So the dependencies of fish, of invertebrates, all of those things are very much tied to the quality of what's in the river, and that means things like temperature, dissolved oxygen, that influence the whole biological and ecological function. And more broadly, of course, it's a riparian area as well that is obviously very important. So when we think about that, it's really about the way in which the river flow is influencing the water quality in turn influences that ecological function.
No, thanks, David. Appreciate that. It's a theme that's come up through a lot of our panel sessions. It's the systemic nature of the basin management challenge, and it's certainly there in terms of water quality management. Next, I'd like to introduce Judy Hagan, who is Manager of Basin Water Quality and Monitoring at the Victorian Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. Thanks for joining us, Judy. What's your perspective on the importance of water quality being included in the Basin Plan?
Thank you. So water quality is one of a number of critical elements within the Basin Plan, and these elements are interrelated and come together to form the Basin Plan. water quality is built also into state management frameworks. So in Victoria, we have a Victorian waterway strategy, we have regional waterway strategies, and we have catchment management strategies, which are some key frameworks and key elements that support water quality within Victoria. But water quality does cross state boundaries. So in the Murray-Darling Basin, poor quality and good water quality passes down through the systems. So there is a clear opportunity and a clear role for the basin plan on water quality. In sustainable water management, we do need to consider more than, is there enough water and do we have enough water? But what is the quality of that water and does it meet the needs of ecosystems and other users?
Thanks, Judy. Appreciate the answer. I'll introduce our third panellist now, Professor Andrew Weston, who is a Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor and Chair of Hydrology and Water Resources at the University of Melbourne. Andrew, looking back, where have we seen basin scale action on water quality work well? Where's a good model we can look back to think about how we should tackle problems today and in the future? And what can we learn about those experiences in the past?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Really, I guess the classic example is the salinity management strategies. There was a clearly recognised problem that was common across the basin. There was a really good understanding of the causes of the issues. There was good data, and there was a collective will to make a change, and some fairly well understood levers to make a difference, lots of transparency and agreed targets, etc. And that has really been a very successful strategy over the last 2 to 3 decades, which has seen salinity levels in the Murray River in particular decline nowadays, probably comfortably underneath the targets that were set a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a great example. I mean, it's one we often look back to sort of as a demonstration of how collective action across the states can lead to basin scale outcomes, and particularly relevant in this discussion as a water quality issue. Judy, I'm interested in your perspective on this from the perspective of state government in leading responses to water quality issues. What's worked well in the past?
Yes, certainly in terms of cross-border, that just wanted to reaffirm the value and the benefits that we've received out of the basin management strategy, the basin salinity management strategy. And I guess what I was thinking about and looking to were also other mechanisms and opportunities where collaboration and working across borders has been supportive of water quality. The one aspect of the current basin plan are the ecological water quality targets. And for the first time, these were set at a regional and local scale across the basin, and they provided a framework by which all states could report against water quality and at an ecological level, and be able to bring those reports together and to see how water quality is sitting. Within Victoria, we already had a framework under our environmental reference standards, but we also know that it did support other jurisdictions to undertake monitoring and build frameworks to be able to report on water quality. And that was enabled through the basin plan's targets. Another mechanism and approach that has been going for quite some years is the Water Quality Advisory Panel that sits under the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. It brings practitioners together across the basin, allows information sharing on water quality issues that are happening there and then, developments and concepts, and leads to shared and collaborative research that can inform all of us together on some of the key issues that we need to face in water quality.
Thanks, Judy. So really, there's some great examples there of how collaboration across the basin has worked well in the past in terms of salinity management, but also in terms of the targets under the basin plan currently, and reassuring that that's delivered some positive outcomes in terms of the action that's been taken place and the sort of research and the sharing of experiences. If we sort of now now I've sort of set the scene about the importance of water quality in the basin plan and the role of the basin plan in potentially supporting coordination and the importance of that coordination in water quality challenges. I want to think now about what are the key challenges coming up in the next decade, the next period of the basin plan. David, I'll ask you first, what do you think are the main water quality threats facing the basin now, and what makes them difficult to manage?
Well, maybe if I begin by the last part of your question, Mike, which was what makes them more difficult. So we're experiencing a hotter and drier climate, and what it's doing is bring the interactions amongst those multiple water quality threats. So the threats in particular might be salinity, nutrients, sediment, metals, other contaminants, warming water temperatures, and obviously part of what those threats are doing is they're leading to low dissolved oxygen events or black water events, and feeding to more blue-green algal blooms as well. And so what makes it challenging is really the scale and complexity of it. If we're trying to manage under reducing flows and increasing temperatures and greater variability as well of the drought flood cycle. So it's a pretty challenging environment, and it's really necessitating that we can move from being able to sort of hindcast that we understand what things have happened in the past to now being able to better predict when those deoxygenation events might occur, when we get algal blooms and potentially fish kills. So managing for those challenges is in itself a big challenge.
Thanks, David. I might ask the same question to you, Andrew, and then we'll delve into that a little bit, both into this sort of question a little bit further. I know you've recently completed a review of water quality issues in the MDB, in the Murray-Darling. What did you learn about the emerging threats in the basin from that review?
I think there's areas where we've done quite a lot of work in the past, salinity, nutrients, etc., and they're important. But there's also a whole lot of different chemicals that we use broadly as a society that end up in our environment. And when we go looking for things like pesticides and PFAS, etc., we do find them in our rivers. We particularly tend to find them when the catchments are well connected, when there's rainfall and runoff events and that sort of thing, and the ability to transport these things into rivers. And there's a lot of ecotoxicological evidence about chronic exposure to a whole lot of synthetic chemicals and the synergistic effects of different mixtures of synthetic chemicals that we don't know very well at all the level of exposure in the basin. We don't really know how much ecological impact those chemicals are happening. So I think that's it's a major, certainly a major knowledge gap and potential threat that we need to look more into in the future.
Thanks, Andrew. Can you give us a little bit more detail around some examples of these chemicals and some of the effects they might have? Like what obviously there's a lot we don't know. What do we know? Like what's some a bit more detail there?
So we do know that coming off where people have gone sampling across the basin, we do find pesticides. They are quite widespread. They're probably more common in the more intensively used or parts of the basin. But we don't really have a good picture of those distributions. So I think, we can name hotspots for some water quality issues. I don't think we're quite at the knowledge point where we can do that for some of these, particularly for, widely used pesticides and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. No, and you mentioned hotspots there. That's a good lead into to where I wanted to go next. Is really the basin plan review starts to introduce actually this idea of hotspots, as a way of focusing effort and coordination. These hotspots are areas where water quality issues have impacts on multiple values and multiple uses. Coordination is needed across water, ag, environment, and land use sectors, and across states. So I think you made a good point there around the fact that we don't really know where these hotspots are. So hotspots the place to start with these synthetic chemicals, or where is the kind of opportunity at the basin scale to start to address this emerging threat?
Look, there are some hotspots we do know about. We see regular issues around Menindee, etc., or have in the last few years. So I don't think it'd be any secret that would be thought about as one of the hotspots. But I think there are different water quality threats, and this is part of the complexity of the whole issue. Different water quality threats in different parts of the basin. It depends a lot on the connection to the catchment. So it's not just about where necessarily the water quality issues become obvious in terms of a fish kill or something like that. What we've really got to think about is the whole impact of all those constituents that are coming from upstream in the catchment, how they're moving through the basin, etc. Now, for some things like pesticides, they're more likely to be perhaps a little bit further up in the basin, being more proximate to the sources where they're used. So I think you're going to have different hotspots for different issues.
Yeah. And the point you made earlier on, that really we don't know where those hotspots are in terms of those synthetic chemicals, is an important one, that there's probably a piece of work to be done to actually locate them.
To get a better understanding of that. Yes.
Yeah. No, thanks, Andrew. Back to you, David, on this issue of hotspots too. Like, what's your thoughts on this concept of hotspots? Like, is this something that's useful for tackling sort of nutrient issues? Or we got kind of good enough visibility on where these hotspots are that we can then really hone in and focus coordinated effort across jurisdictions in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that they've been really important for focusing collective action in the past. And often it's come to a point where the nature of them, of those hotspots, and what we're talking about is often deoxygenation and fish kills, have been major issues, at least locally and sometimes more extensively. But what we also need to consider is, are they, number one, a potential for almost the next generation of nutrient-related issues that we get in the basin? So in other words, if we've got something popping up and it's an issue locally, is it going to pop up at another place at another time in the future? So, those issues are still going to continue to emerge through the basin, and what we need to think of now is the way in which those acute hotspots are connected by the hydrology of the river. So in other words, can we almost optimize the environmental flows to be able to address not just a local acute and hotspot, but more broadly to achieve some really good environmental outcomes, and to be able to build resilience into other areas of the river where potentially in the future those hotspots might occur. So identifying those emerging risks, being able to be proactive and bring about the remediation or mitigation actions early to provide enough resilience in the system that we reduce the incidence of those acute impacts.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's been a theme in other sessions too. The challenge of responding to problems of the past when we know things are changing so quickly. So what's coming next? What's coming around the corner? We do need to be thinking a bit more in the future as well. So do you think there's a role for the basin plan in sort of, not just managing the connectivity, but actually trying to anticipate where those problems might emerge in the future and trying to get ahead of it rather than responding once the problems emerge?
Yeah, and I think of some of the work that's being done in the upper basin at the moment around the hypoxia and fish kills that have occurred in the upper basin, and thinking about, can we better anticipate those, and what are the environmental flows and mitigation measures that we might put in place so that we start to connect that upper basin to the outcomes further down in the basin.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Judy, I'm going to ask you a question on this one too, really around sort of reactive mode for water quality issues versus a sort of more proactive, long-term preventative mode. With the Victoria's catchment management authorities, I know this is something that is really embedded in their thinking. How do we go about balancing these two things? Because obviously, water quality issues, when they emerge, they can trigger a crisis and a lot of investment and focus. But some of these problems really, they need a long-term strategic kind of attention to really solve. How do we balance those two sort of modes?
Yeah, look, certainly, I mean, as you mentioned, Victoria does deliver water quality through those catchment management frameworks. And I think in Victoria, it's those frameworks and strategies that can inform investment and form long-term actions within catchments to improve water quality as a part of the broader ecological framework. So water quality being one of those aspects that catchment investment supports. There is our CMAs, then it becomes a collaboration space. So CMAs do engage with and coordinate with water corporations, and there is this opportunity, and that is ongoing and continues to make sure that we have the monitoring in place and we're using the best information that we have, understanding what might be a relevant trigger for action. These processes are underway in a number of our basin catchments where we have this collaboration and this ability to support and engage across those organisations that have a role. We can't do one and not the other, I think, and we do see that being implemented. That we have those sort of two streams of watching and supporting water quality, and I think sometimes it might be different information that informs the two. So the use of continuous dissolved oxygen monitoring is something that Victoria has increased, and looking at how do we screen that information and what do we do with that information, so that and then what is the action that we can undertake should we start to see a decline in dissolved oxygen? When can we intervene and how? It's a broad conversation, and because water quality goes across different users, there is that broader conversation about how does the whole framework fit. It's not an environmental issue. It's a broader issue that is important across the range of different uses and the ranges of ways that we operate rivers and the ways that we manage and plan for catchments and water quality. Yeah.
It's really relieving to hear that sort of the depth of thinking and the kind of sophistication of the program. Like for me, from where I sit, like I remember when I started my career, there was a lot of focus around water quality, and it seems to kind of been lost a little bit in the noise around, not noise, but the very important work done around environmental water management and water resources management. So it does feel like the time has come for a bit more attention on water quality, but there's clearly been ongoing work in that space by the states, at least in Victoria, over the long term. So that's very reassuring. Judy, you've disappeared. If you come, I've got another question for you. Where is our state of knowledge? And this really comes to sort of a need to kind of put more focus here on water quality. Do we need more research? From your perspective, the challenges you're looking at, or do we already know enough and need to do just a better job of translating our knowledge into management and practice? Sort of where does it? I'm guessing you're going to say it's a bit of both, but if you can just dig into a bit more detail there.
Yeah, look, so I've been working with the Water Quality Advisory Panel, which sits under the MDBA framework for several years, and new pieces of work and new collaborations are being undertaken in that joint collaborative research space all the time, and they're all critical to building our understanding. One of the questions that came to us was how climate change being a really critical factor for us to consider in how water quality is looking and where it's going, and the ability to look at things such as blue-green algal blooms and our ability to understand how they're going to change and operate and diversify under climate change was too hard a few years ago. But because there's been increasing work, there is increasing analysis, we're starting to be able to hear that some of the research organisations are starting to build that forward picture. So from my perspective, there are a number of questions. We do water quality analyses out of the state, and for the Matter 12 for the basin plan reporting, there continue to be questions that we are seeking to try and answer in new ways. And that's going to continues to require information and data, but also continuing to understand how do we analyse that information and what research do we need. So to me, there remains a number of key questions, and that's not, to me, going to stop. That's going to continue to emerge as we build our understanding under climate change. We'll continue to need that research work.
It's good to hear that coordination committee across the states is taking a role in posing that question too. That's great for the use of that kind of basin, basin coordination. I might now ask a question for David in relation to the issues you've raised around nutrients, algal blooms, carbon dynamics. What do you think are the important knowledge gaps, and what's the sort of scale of effort that's needed to really tackle those? What does that look like in the basin?
Look, we've developed up a huge body of knowledge, and I think part of it is around now coordinating and being able to bring that knowledge together across some different and evolving aspects of water quality. I think one of those is probably around carbon, both dissolved and particulate carbon, and the importance of that carbon in terms of its role in anoxia or hypoxia type events. And it's all part of this balance between the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the carbon. That balance is probably not as well understood as what we would like, and certainly monitoring for carbon, both in dissolved and particulate forms, is certainly not undertaken as frequently as for nutrients, but is extremely important. I mean, carbon is the whole base of the productivity of the food chain, really. So being able to bring together those carbon and nutrient sources, some of the transformations of nutrients are really quite critical. And then the way that those nutrients interact and are dispersed between, say, wetlands and floodplains and river reaches. The other aspect, I guess, is that we've got an enormous amount of information that's potentially available from remote sensing, and we really need to be able to exploit that as much as we possibly can. The transformation that remote sensing is bringing is quite remarkable, but we don't quite have our ability to process that information up to scratch as well. And that can be brought alongside the standard monitoring that we're currently doing to much better inform and fill some of the gaps in what we're doing, because the scale is huge here. And so, how do you integrate point source measurements and the whole basin? And remote sensing is going to be the key to doing that integration.
Yeah, I sort of think of the scale of it that we've has been put towards understanding water quality and issues in the Great Barrier Reef catchments. It's been an enormous effort over decades. I don't feel like that effort's been allocated in the Murray-Darling Basin. Who is doing this work now? Like, what's the scale of what's going on at the moment? I know the One Basin CRC is not doing anything in water quality, for example. Who is doing this work? I mean, there seems to be a real priority. And what scale? Am I right? This is kind of a big. We're talking about a big program to really get the understanding that's needed around the sort of carbon dynamics and the balances between carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and how they play into these water quality issues, and then the ability to use remote sensing to track and monitor these contaminants.
Yeah, I think you've sort of highlighted a point that, again, at the scale of individual research programs, some of them have been excellent in bringing together different aspects of social, ecological, and other parts of the river system. The MD work is one that comes to mind, the current flow mirror, and the CRC One Basin, and really that connectivity of all of the players in that is going to be really important, and that interaction with the states, of course, is controlling the transboundary type issues as well. So, some challenges, but some really valuable things that have been brought together in the current Basin Plan Review, which is bringing people together openly and transparently, bringing these things up and making sure that we've got a point of reference for the things that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just in the past we've seen the role of research in really galvanising effort and coordinated effort across jurisdictions. It just feels like there's an opportunity here in this space to really, for water quality, to be part of a collaborative program of work, water quality research to be part of it. But if there's a real issue on the other side, if we don't have the knowledge, then it's going to be very hard to progress management at the basin scale. So I think it really is a serious concern at the moment where we're at, I think, is what would be my view, and need to kind of put some attention onto it. Maybe move to you, Andrew. I know in the review you did, and this is really what's alerted me to this issue and why I'm kind of concerned myself, is that kind of significant knowledge gaps in water quality management in the basin. What were some of those gaps, the most important ones, and what do you see as the path forward?
Yeah, so I'm just reflecting a bit on David's comments for a second there. I think if you look at water quality itself, there's not a lot of coordinated research at all at the moment. There's individual researchers doing pieces of work, which are all good pieces of work, but it's not being brought together in a really big picture. In terms of some of the things we were looking at in that review, and I guess we were concentrating a bit more on some of the emerging chemicals, etc., rather than salinity nutrients, which they're important, but we know a bit more there. In terms of things like pesticides, we really don't do much systematic monitoring at all of those issues. Similarly with things like, say, PFAS, we know there are specific places around the basin where there are issues, and so there's local monitoring, but there's really no systematic monitoring of pesticides. Metals is some, but not a lot. So I think we're quite good at monitoring the standard salinities, sediments, nutrients, temperature, pH, etc. We're quite good at doing that, and that's partly because there's a constrained number of things to monitor there. But I think some of these emerging, and when we say emerging, pesticides in the environment has been an issue talked about for more than 50 years, so it's hardly new, but we're not good at monitoring for that in our rivers at the moment. The one systematic area of pesticide monitoring is in the reef, which you mentioned before.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge there too is if these issues are further up in the catchments, then we're talking about many more rivers, not just the few larger rivers. It's the tributary rivers, which there's many more of those, and it's a bigger landscape to be keeping track of.
So I think that means you need some really careful thinking around design of that monitoring and investigation, etc. You can't just go and monitor everything everywhere.
Yeah, I mean that comes to the question in the Q&A from Christy. It refers to an article by Nick Bond, Avril Horn, and Rob Morden about the forgotten rivers, the smaller creeks and headwaters. And the question is, what's the water quality picture for these, and how can you build an effective risk monitoring framework to effectively risk manage the threats to water quality in those catchments? I mean, that's probably a research question. There's probably no simple answer, Andrew, but it comes to the point you were making before. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Look, yeah, in fact, the bits of our network that we monitor least of all are the really small streams, which are perhaps intermittent, etc., high in the catchments. We don't monitor much below 100 square kilometres, and I guess between upstream of a lot of our regulating reservoirs, we've got reasonable monitoring at sort of the hundreds to thousands of square kilometres. But yeah, that those small streams, which are a very large fraction of the total stream length, we don't monitor much at all.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the relevance of those in the context of the basin plan, because the focus on water management is really in the larger river systems, and the water quality is now adding on to that. It's like, how do you get the most from environmental flows? Does that mean we've got, these are kind of out of scope for the basin plan? Is this just the basin plan for the big rivers, or is it the basin plan for the whole basin, including the smaller rivers? I think it's an interesting question about the authority of the Commonwealth in that space. Not sure if you've got any comments, or if any of the panelists have got a comment on that one at all.
So I think if you go back to fundamentals, the catchments are where the water comes from. What's happening in the catchment is important for things like water quality. Now, that might mean that the basin plan needs to work through a whole lot of other instruments and organisations, but perhaps there's a coordinating role for the basin plan in that.
Yep.
Mike, I think that, your question was almost one that was, to paraphrase it into some of the outcomes of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan review meeting that took place recently, was that, where does the jurisdictional power of the MDBA lie? Is it immediately in the vicinity of the river, or does it extend right throughout the catchment? And what authority have they got to be able to make critical alterations that will, in the broader catchment, that will impact the river system?
Yeah, no, thanks, David. And it seems to me, like this is an area with a lot of knowledge gaps and a great need for research. And we're all researchers, and it's easy to kind of say this is a self-serving comment, but this is what it feels like to me. And that's an area where collaboration is really valuable, because you don't need to do the research over and over again. You want to, and Judy made this point before in relation to the work to date under the Basin Plan, the Water Quality Committee under the Basin Plan. There's real benefits in that coordination around investigation. So, that may well be where the opportunity lies under the Basin Plan review, is to kind of coordinate that research across the basin. And it's been a role for the MDBC in the past, and it'd be nice to see that resurrected. No comment from you, David. Just a nod.
No, fully agree, Mike. Part of it is around jurisdictions and that interaction of the MDBA with the states, and then you've sort of got a groundswell of information being fed to those those groups to sort of better inform where. It's almost as if it's where do you target in the catchment that optimises value for money being put into catchment management.
Good. Thanks, David.
So we have had a couple of questions here, and I'll put one more to pose. But if anyone else has got questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll try and get to those before we finish. We've got a little bit more time. As I wait for more questions to come in, Andrew, I'd like to explore the question about what opportunities does the Basin Plan review create to address water quality threats. We've touched on a few things, but just an opportunity if you kind of lift up sort of some key points you'd like to make in relation to the Basin Plan review and where it might focus attention.
Yeah, okay. So I think the Basin Plan, one of the big things it can do is that coordination role, trying to make sure that we're all working to, I guess, common aims. I think the aims of the plan ultimately are about a healthy working basin people talk about, right? So things like water quality play into that because they have a significant influence on the end game, which is environmental health. They have impacts in agricultural sector, etc. as well, particular water quality issues for irrigators, etc. So I think that's one of the key things. I think also just being able to so a change I would like to see is bringing in a little bit more holistic assessment of water quality around the things that we don't really look at the moment, so that we're either very confident that it's not a problem, or we can address the problem in a proactive manner.
Yeah, this is the sort of the idea of let's not just look at the problems of the past. Let's anticipate what's coming, what might be coming in the future, and that may well save us a lot of effort and costs and controversy for that matter, if we can get ahead of those problems, if that's possible. Yeah, there's some interesting comments coming through. I'll go back to the Q&A in a minute. I've just jumped across to the chat and some interesting comments coming through. One about, Paul Weber reminder that there's plenty of things that we can do. That talk about research doesn't mean we can't act. And there's plenty, we don't need perfect answers. And that's a point very well made. Thanks, Paul, for that point. This question around jurisdiction that raised around the role of the Commonwealth versus the role of the states, that's a really important question. I mean, if we work in a collaborative environment, then the authority can play a role in supporting collaboration around research and action. That seems to be the role it's played up to date, and been an important role based on the comments from Judy earlier on. Dave, what's your thoughts on the opportunity under the Basin Plan review? What would you like to highlight?
Well, if I went to some of the comments, Mike, a lot of those are around some of the previous national scale programs, Bureau of Meteorology, some of the AquaWatch program, the eReefs program, big programs, but attempting to bring that level of coordination to the decision-making process, to support the decision-making process with really foundational data that is also able to be used in a predictive sense. So, looking through those comments, I think they've been really important. The other one was around First Nations knowledge and being able to integrate that successfully. And use that knowledge as a basis for improving the management as well. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But as we enter a more water-constrained time, with climate playing a major role in the future water availability and needs, then we are going to have to be quite innovative and think a little bit differently to what we've done in the past. Get that water, maximise the environmental flows, and not just to be able to address the quantity issue, but the quality around how do we use those environmental flows to improve the fish and bird populations is going to be really key.
Yeah. Thanks, David. That's good. I mean, the comments just come through from Graham Hawke, suggesting that maybe water quality's been in the too hard basket for the Commonwealth. I think the point there is that water quality is an issue for everyone. It's an issue for irrigators. It's an issue for town water supply. It's an issue for the environment. It's an issue for First Nations. Everyone's concerned about it. And as I travel around the basin, more and more I'm hearing new concerns rising around water quality. So I think there really is a time's come for some effort and the bullet to be bitten on this one, and some steps to be taken to progress it. And I think there's been some good ideas today as to where some of that focus might lie. The hotspots idea is one that can help, not forgetting the sort of the broader basin scale need to kind of look at across the whole basin, the headwater streams, the source areas, and areas where there are other water quality issues. The potential for emerging problems in areas that where there haven't been those before. So it's a really, I think, exciting in some ways opportunity that there's kind of I think we're in a bit of an option to pivot to put more focus onto this, but that's going to require a bit of investment, I think. There's lots of things coming through now on the chat. I'm struggling to juggle between the Q&A and the chat. Any more questions? No, I'm going to turn to you, Judy, then, and maybe invite David and Andrew to have a look through the chat where there's any kind of comments to draw out from there. Judy, have you got anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I think, I mean, where I was sitting at with this, and I'm just checking you can hear me because I've changed my audio. It's a bit better now, I hope.
Great.
Great. And I think you've really pointed to it, Mike, about at the stage of listening, just listening to First Nations, listening to the regional voices. I think there is a lot of knowledge within, for example, our CMAs and our water corps, and that's where we'll be working and coordinating and collaborating to consider what contribution would Victoria make to this discussion in water quality at the Basin Plan Review. I think that's certainly where we're at. I think there is opportunity. One of the things we have talked about is environmental water, and there has been these sort of significant investment in purchasing of environmental water. And now I think there is that time to look at leveraging and how do you work with how rivers are operated, and how do you look at leveraging those investments that the Commonwealth has made, and now considering how those investments could be made to make the most of all that purchase that has been made. And that might be through fish routes that allow fish to escape poor water quality events should they occur, and so that sort of complementary investment, I think, would be an area that I certainly am interested in personally just looking into and thinking about for water quality. So continuing with a shared vision and a shared framework, I think there has been these benefits, making sure it's making sure it's streamlined, making sure that the time and the investment in different activities under the Basin Plan are those that are going to make a difference, and not administrative burdens that don't make a difference. So really focusing in on being streamlined, and certainly considering climate change. I think the first iteration of the Basin Plan had less to say about this, and certainly for water quality, that's where we need to look forward. One of the roles that I have is in the monitoring team within DECA. So looking at where DECA invests in monitoring of water flows and also water quality. And the question we're starting to ask ourselves going forward is, what data and information will we need, or will our colleagues need in 30 years, that we should be collecting now to help us really understand what's happening? And I think, for me, having that future mindset where we say we need to have that information and be prepared for the challenges that those that come after us will be working on in 30 years' time.
Fantastic. It's reassuring to hear that, Judy. Sorry, did you have something to add there?
No, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, no, really pleasing to hear that sort of long-term perspective, because we know, those of us who've been around for a while know that these problems are long-run problems, and we'll be tackling this one for some time, and we need to be set up for the future. Thanks, Judy. Anyone on the panelists who've maybe had a look through the chat? Andrew, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, I think just a couple of points. First, on the efficiency one, I think there's perhaps an opportunity that we're missing around water quality a bit on the monitoring side, is we seem to very rarely bring together the operational testing that's done by water corps, etc., on their raw water intakes for town water supply, etc. We don't see that data reported together with the sort of the stream monitoring sort of data that Judy works on. Maybe there's a good opportunity for some efficiency in there. and also perhaps a mechanism for looking at some of the things I was talking about before, because there's a whole lot. There's a myriad of water quality requirements in drinking water. So that's one point. And I guess something that I would like to see more of is some really clear, transparent reporting on outcomes of things like water quality. I think the whole outcomes reporting around perhaps the basin plan outcomes in general could be better. If you look in the brief, there's a whole lot of report cards, etc., which are targeted to the public. They're plain language, easily accessible, etc. I think we're still in the basin probably a little bit more in the scientific report, etc. level of things. And we did a nice project with Judy a few years ago now where we put a lot of time into some of that communication. And so I think that's actually another really important thing. Maybe it extends across more than water quality in the basin plan, but there's an opportunity there, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Judy, did you see you nodding? Did you have anything to add there?
No, but it does. Certainly that has been an approach we have been trying to really, when we do undertake water quality analysis, trying to really research the questions that people are most concerned about, and trying to, I think that's part of that research space, but also that innovation space. We've heard about satellite imagery and so there's the reporting space, but also making sure we're looking at the right questions. So for dissolved oxygen, we can look at our monthly dissolved oxygen metering, where we've gone to the river and checked the dissolved oxygen at that point in time, but we're starting to build event reporting and being able to say, well, how many events, how many times was the water quality at a level where it would put fish under stress. And that's quite a different tool and quite a different analysis, and I think that's part of the story, is making sure that we're answering the right questions and using the best kind of analysis and the most available, and if we can share that across jurisdictions and build that story, then that could be a path forward.
Thanks,
but it's
Judy.
not an official position. That's just a consideration and a thought bubble. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Judy. Appreciate your thoughts. David, before we finish up, do you have any final comments?
Well, I thought that one of the themes that came through was around connectivity, and Andrew mentioned it with the connectivity of sort of utility or water authority monitoring with what's being done in NRMs, with what's being done by other groups. That's one aspect of connectivity. The other one would be around the connectivity of the researchers themselves, to make sure that we're thinking at a basin scale and really starting to properly cover the key areas that need to be monitored. And then the connectivity to the authority and to the states is obviously really key as well. And that theme just seems to have resonated right through, I think, today, for me anyway.
Thanks, David. And of course, that talks to the role of the MDBA and the Commonwealth in providing coordination and connectivity. I couldn't have summed up and provided such a brilliant closing comment as you just did, David. So I'm going to leave it right there. So thank you. And thank you to all the speakers. And I really appreciate your time and your contribution today. It's very thoughtful. It's a really important area. Water quality is one of those old topics. It's been around for a long time and it's easy to kind of neglect, but I think its time has come for a lot more focus. So I'm pleased we've been able to put a bit of attention on it today, and I know it's been spotlighted in the discussion paper as well as by chapter. And thanks to also the participants online who have contributed to the chat and the questions. I really appreciate all those comments as well. Okay, so I'll wrap it up there. We do have a couple more panel sessions to go. You'll be able to get hold of the recording from this session at our review hub. It'll be put up in the next 24 hours. The link is there. The next session is tomorrow at 2 o'clock Melbourne time. It's on building a powerful research and innovation system. I'll be chairing that one as well. And then we have one on First Nations leadership. We've got another one on Friday on modernising water delivery systems, and then another one on First Nations leadership coming up next month. So thank you all again for your participation, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike.